Hello everyone, welcome to the Bonneville Mennonite Church service. This morning we are reading from Exodus 1:8 through 2:10, and it's a long passage, so I'm not going to read it this morning, but if you have a Bible you can pull it up online. It's the story of Moses' birth, when he was born, what happened around the time that he was born. Hi Orvin and Laura. It's the story of Moses' birth. Exodus 1:8 through 2:10. Have you ever had something happen to you that set off a chain of events that changed your entire life? Or to say it this way, can you trace back certain events in your life to one pivotal moment? To give you an example, I had dinner this week with Nick, two seminary friends that I had not seen in a while, and one of my seminary profs and her husband. During that dinner, I told my professor that if it weren't for her, my life would conceivably be completely different. You see, she goes to Faith Mennonite Church, which is the evening church that Nick and I attend. It's also the church that owns Hope House and Faith House. Hope House is the house that we live in, and we serve as hosts to people who need short-term emergency housing. One time during class, this was years ago, Rachel, my professor, mentioned that she goes to this unique church called Faith Mennonite. She talked about how it was a local congregation, that most people live within biking distance or walking distance to the church. It's also an economically diverse congregation. It's a neurodiverse congregation, meaning those who worship there come from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life. This description of community intrigued me. I then inquired about doing my ministry internship there at Faith Mennonite. This included being mentored by Kay Bontrager Singer, who is the pastor at Faith. While interning at Faith, the community decided to buy the house next to Faith House, this is here Hope House, and make it into another housing unit called Hope House. As they were looking for a host for Hope House, Kay asked if Nick would be interested. And Nick and I were dating at the time, and Nick was living in Elkhart. He had been looking to move to Goshen anyways, so he could be closer to work and closer to his new baby nephew. And so he agreed. Then after we got married, I too moved into Hope House, and here we are. So all of that can be traced back to Rachel Miller Jacobs casually talking about her church community at Faith Mennonite. What if she hadn't mentioned anything that day? Or what if I had been sick that day and missed class? Would Nick and I be living somewhere else? I've heard that fate, for lack of a better word, works like this. If Rachel hadn't mentioned Faith Mennonite that day, then maybe she would have another day and I would have heard about it then. Or I would have learned about it a different way. No matter what, I would have ended up at Hope House. I don't know how fate works, if it exists. I think one of the most confusing parts about faith and Christianity is comprehending how and when God works in the world. Is God fate? If so, how does free will interact with God's will? Now that your head is surely spinning with all the complicated questions of life, God, and faith, let's look at how a series of events unfolded, culminating in the miraculous life that was Moses. Moses, the savior of the Hebrews, the one who would part waters, debate with pharaohs, meet God in a burning bush, receive the 10 Commandments, and lead God's people to the edge of the Promised Land, which is the covenantal land that had been promised to Moses' ancestors, Abraham and Sarah. However, that man started, as we all do, as a baby. He was born in a scary and dangerous time to be a Hebrew boy. You see, God's first promise to Abraham and Sarah that their descendants would multiply and become a great nation, this promise had come true. As we learn in the story that comes right before this one, God's people had grown in favor with the Egyptian people through Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel. But many years have passed since Joseph kept the Egyptians alive during a time of famine, and a new king has risen to power. This new Pharaoh was not ready to treat the Hebrews as if they were kin or part of the Egyptian people. This new Pharaoh was threatened by the growing numbers of Hebrew people. Driven by xenophobia, this Pharaoh decided he wanted to obliterate this threat to the kingdom. To do this, he made 3 moves to stomp down the Hebrew people. Each move was met with clever and calculated counter moves exacted by women. The Pharaoh's first move was to enslave the Israelites. If we've grown numb to the concept of enslavement, here are some words used to describe how the Hebrew people were treated. Oppressed, forced labor, ruthless, which was used twice, bitter, hard service, every kind of field labor. However, the harder the Pharaoh squeezed the Hebrew people, the more resilient they became. Ironically, the more force he used against them, the more they multiplied. As you will see, this story is chock full of delicious, holy irony. Irony that not only makes for a compelling story, but it also exposes that a lust for power is truly weak and ineffective. That is the power of holy irony. Frustrated that his attempts at control have been thwarted, the Pharaoh enforced a second move to impose order, this time from a different, more violent angle. He summoned 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and told them to kill any male Hebrew baby that they helped deliver. The Pharaoh said, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." Apparently, the baby girls were not a threat to this Pharaoh, which is again ironic, since as you will see, it was largely the defiant actions of women who worked to thwart him. At this point, the king has escalated his measures for control. Notice how he moves from enslavement to ethnic cleansing. However, this too proved futile. It says in verse 17 that the women did not do as the king had commanded. Why? Because they feared God. I've said this before, but every time a story mentions the fear of the Lord or fearing God, I feel compelled to clarify that this does not mean that they were afraid of God. It meant instead that they believed in God. They approached God with awe and respect. In this circumstance, their fear of the Lord, their devotion to God, was greater than any fear or allegiance they felt toward the Egyptian Pharaoh. As Roger Naum pointed out, notice the contrast between the fear of the Egyptian king and the fear of these women. One fear led to attempted genocide, the other to subversive action against authority driven by empathy. One led to death, the other to life. Notice how these midwives cleverly explain why they have not been killing baby boys. They play on potential biases the Pharaoh holds, saying that the Hebrew women are vigorous, almost animal-like in their labor. Unlike the delicate nature of the Egyptian women, the Hebrew women have their babies so quickly that they are done before the midwives can even get there. I like that this is kind of a nod or a wink to women, a wink of sorts to women everywhere. While God rewarded their clever deception, the Pharaoh fell for it, and the Hebrew people continued to flourish. This brings us to move 3 from the king. What he was doing wasn't working. Instead of acting creatively or realizing that his violence was not getting him anywhere, he doubled down. Now he commanded all his people to throw every baby boy born to the Hebrews into the Nile. This is the critical moment in which Moses is born. This is the moment the story has been building towards. How would a baby survive these odds? Here we discover another decadent layer of irony. As J. Cheryl Exum says, without Moses, there would be no story. But without the initiative of these women, there would be no Moses. The midwives cleared the way to safety initially, but there are more obstacles that need to be cleared for Moses to survive infancy. In the beginning of time, God declared creation good. Now, all of these years later, a mother named Jochebed looks in the eye of her beloved baby boy, and she too calls this creation good. She decides his little life is worth risking everything, and she attempts to hide him for the first 3 months of his life. Then, when she could hide him no longer, with great care she fashioned a basket for him. The word used for basket here is the same word used for Noah's Ark in Noah's story. She attempted to build a vessel that could withstand the Nile River and deliver this precious cargo someplace safely. Pay attention to how yet another woman followed the rules mandated by the king, yet found a smart way to subvert them. If anyone asked her, yes, she had thrown her son in the Nile River. Did she know that Pharaoh's daughter bathes in the Nile just downstream from where she tenderly placed him? We will never know. Either way, the princess saw the little ark and had a maid bring it to her. When she picked him from the water, even though she knew this was a Hebrew male child, she was moved to compassion by his tears. It was in that moment that Miriam, who had been watching out for her baby brother, approached the princess and proposed an exceedingly brilliant plan for caring for this tiny child. "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" she asked. "Yes," said the princess. So Miriam ran to her mother, who was now going to be paid to raise her rescued child. When Moses grew older, after receiving love and nutrition from his birth mother, he went to live with his adopted family. Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses because she drew him from the water. If nothing else, this story shows you the extremes that parents will go to protect and save their children. The water either serves as their deliverance or their destruction, life or death. There are consequences to the choices the characters make in this story. Do their actions lead to life or death? The king, drunk on his desire for power and domination, makes choices that call for death. The midwives, Jochebed, Miriam, and a princess all make risky choices that birth life. As Cameron B.R. Howard says, the Hebrew women are full of life. Their identity resists death. Now, I ask you, do your choices resist death? Does your identity resist death? Not by trying all the anti-aging products you can get your hands on. Not by living in fear that at any moment your life can be extinguished. But do you make choices that expose corrupt power? Or do you live within that corrupt power, benefiting from it, thriving off of it? The princess surely lived lavishly due to the superficial success of her father. Yet she threatened that entire existence by breaking her father's rule. She raised an illegal, alien child in the king's very own household. A baby's tears were enough to move her to action that brought about life, not death. This is the literal birth of a movement of liberation. Women acted as literal midwives to the man that would one day know the great I am, the man who would set God's people free. This is the backbone of part of our faith tradition, leading up to another little boy born under an oppressive, xenophobic regime. The Bible is brimming with stories budding in rich irony that acts as revelation, peeling back layers, exposing how grabbing for power is weakness, not strength, revealing how fear of people leads to death, fear of the Lord, a life lived with a conscience, a life aligned with the will of God, ultimately leads to life. What are you willing to do or give up to promote life, not death? Could you look a powerful king in the eye and defy him? Would you wade into the water? Would you approach a princess? Would you break the shackles of an oppressed people? If nothing else, let us continue to look for the holy irony that twists and weaves itself into every single day of our lives, crafting a series of events leading to a place that may just be the promised land. May it be so. Hear these words of blessing. Child of God, may you live in fear. Not in fear of people, but in the fear of the Lord, the awe-inspiring amazement of a God who works with majestic and delicious irony, bringing life out of death. Amen. Go in peace.